What's a crafty dancer's favorite hobby? Cutting a rug. Today, I'm going to recap a 2018 action thriller film called Silencer. A quick warning, there will be major spoilers ahead. The movie begins by showing a squad of snipers from the United States overseeing an attempt to retrieve a leader of a terrorist group from Iraq. The Iraqi man wanted to be secured by the United States soldiers because they were considered to have important information that was beneficial to them. On the other hand, several members of the terrorist group were seen moving towards the pickup point through a secret route. Apparently, they did not stay silent when their leader was about to be captured by the United States soldiers. They want to thwart the efforts of the United States soldiers, one of which is to disable the sniper squad first. The terrorist group managed to locate one of the snipers and took the man down. The situation got out of control because the terrorist group managed to corner them, so Frank, one of the United States soldiers who was the leader of the sniper squad, was determined to take unexpected and unplanned action, namely by killing the terrorist leader and his family. 10 years have passed since that incident. Frank, who has now left the military, even years ago, does not deny that he is still haunted by the shooting incident, which weighs on his mind so much that he cannot tell anyone about it. After no longer being a soldier, Frank often spends his time caring for his car repair shop, which is now his job to make ends meet. That day, Frank and one of his employees had finished their job of repairing a customer's car and intended to deliver the car back to the customer. In the evening, Frank, who now lives with his wife Cassie and his stepdaughter Shannon, was having dinner together. Cassie asked him to take her and Shannon on a weekend getaway. When Frank tells them that he has to take his customer's repaired car to the customer's house, Cassie insists that she come along. Because Cassie continued to insist, Frank finally allowed Cassie and Shannon to come with him. Although he felt a little worried because the customer was none other than a crime lord who had previously worked for him. Frank finally arrived at the crime lord's house. However, for one reason or another, Frank clashed with one of the crime lord's men and fought with him. Not long after, a man named Lazarus, who was the right hand of the crime lord, arrived and immediately intervened. Lazarus then takes Frank to meet the crime lord named Leo. Frank received an envelope containing enough cash from Leo to pay for Frank's repair of his car. However, he realized that the amount of money was too much if only to pay for car repairs. Leo apparently did this on purpose because he wanted to offer Frank to return to work for him as a hitman. However, Frank refused the offer. Even so, Leo gave him the envelope with the money and let him go from there. On the other hand, Frank still wants to return to work for Leo. But now he had a family, and if he accepted Leo's offer to return to work for him, it would put Cassie and Shannon at risk, and he didn't want that to happen. In the evening, Frank watches a television program that reports that Leo's daughter was the victim of a hit-and-run and died. He was very surprised to know that, especially since he knew exactly how much Leo loved his daughter. Not long after, Frank is visited by Lazarus, who then tells him that Leo wants Frank to help him avenge the death of his daughter. At first, Frank refuses because he doesn't want to go back into the world of gangsters again. However, because Lazarus threatened him, he had no other choice. On the other hand, Cassie, who saw the arrival of Lazarus and Leo's men at their house, then asked if they wanted to see Frank at this time of night. Because Frank refused to explain in detail to Cassie, she became angry and slapped him. However, he ignored her and then left with Lazarus. Arriving at Leo's place, Frank saw Leo, who still looked frustrated and depressed over the death of his daughter. Leo then asked Frank to kill the hit-and-run perpetrator who killed his daughter. Leo threatens to tell Cassie about Frank's dark past if he refuses to help him. Because Frank didn't want his wife to know about his past, he finally agreed to Leo's request. The next day, Lazarus handed Frank complete documents regarding the hit-and-run perpetrator so that he could immediately carry out his mission. It didn't take long for Frank to find the whereabouts of the culprit. After determining the right position, he rushed to set his sniper rifle to take action. Seeing the perpetrator who was at home with his family, Frank was reminded of the incident 10 years ago, where he had made a fatal mistake that until now has always weighed on his mind. Not wanting to make the same mistake, Frank decided not to kill the hit-and-run perpetrator and let the police arrest him. However, unbeknownst to Frank, Leo had ordered one of his men to watch him from a distance and report it to Leo. Knowing that it was Frank who didn't act at all and instead allowed the hit-and-run perpetrator to be caught by the police, Leo then ordered Lazarus to kill the hit-and-run perpetrator as well as Frank. Elsewhere, Cassie, who was at home, was surprised by the presence of Lazarus and Leo's men, who shot her and kidnapped her daughter Shannon. After that, Lazarus and his men, who managed to kidnap the hit-and-run perpetrator from the police, then took the man to a place to be tortured to death on orders from Leo. Meanwhile, Frank, who had just arrived home, was very surprised to find Cassie lying helpless and rushed to take his wife to the hospital. Frank then meets one of his former comrades on the sniper squad, a man named Timothy, and asks for his help with Shannon's kidnapping. After Timothy agreed to help him, Frank met Cassie at the hospital, who seemed devastated by what had happened to her and her daughter. Cassie felt very angry at Frank because he had lied to her all this time and caused all of this to happen. Frank then approached Cassie and apologized for everything. He then promised his wife that he and Timothy would bring Shannon home safe and asked her to rest. Frank and Timothy then rushed to Leo's house, but when they got there, Frank found that Leo and Lazarus weren't there, and neither was Shannon. Timothy managed to bring down Leo's only henchman, who was still there. However, when he was caught off guard and the man reached for his gun to shoot Frank, Timothy killed the man without thinking, making it difficult for them to get information about Shannon's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Leo, who is still devastated by the death of his daughter, then takes Shannon to his hometown. Even though Leo treated her very well like his own daughter, Shannon was still afraid and wanted to return to her mother. On the other hand, Leo's wife Marta considers Leo's actions to kidnap Shannon too much and tries to convince him to end all this, but Leo ignores his wife. Having worked for Leo for some time, Frank could locate where they could get information about Leo and Lazarus. Frank and Timothy then visit one of Leo's largest drug factories in Mexico, where they can easily take down Leo's men and extract information about Shannon's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Lazarus, who had anticipated that Frank would come to them, then ordered one of his most formidable men, a man named Nelson, to kill Frank. However, Frank finds Nelson having fun at a bar, where he attacks him and forces Nelson to tell Shannon's whereabouts, while Timothy beats up the rest of Leo's men. After getting the desired information, Frank then kills Nelson. Knowing the location of Shannon's whereabouts being held captive at Leo's house, Frank and Timothy prepared their weapons to face Leo and all his men to save Shannon. On the other hand, Lazarus is preparing all his men to guard Leo's residence, so Frank cannot infiltrate there. However, Lazarus and his men were no match for Frank and Timothy, who were professional snipers, so they could easily be defeated in gun battles. Although in the process, Timothy was seriously injured, so Frank had to continue his mission alone. Knowing that Lazarus and his men had been defeated, Leo rushed to take Shannon away from there at gunpoint. However, Frank then confronts them, asks Leo to hand Shannon over to him, and promises to keep him alive. Marta, who was there, then tried to convince Leo to let Shannon go, because after all, she was not their daughter, and she had her own family who loved her very much. However, Leo ignored all of that and prepared to attack Frank. Shannon, seeing an opportunity to catch Leo off guard, then bit his hand, causing Leo to turn his attention away from Frank for a moment. Frank threw a knife into Leo's heart, killing him. Frank then brings Shannon home and keeps his promise to Cassie, who has forgiven him and accepted him as he is. If you enjoyed this video, don't be shy to hit the like button, and if you disliked it, hit the dislike button twice, just to be sure. You should watch the whole movie. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe for more video like this.